let's see. Give me a sec.
Mm-hmm.
All right, go ahead and
Test, 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 test,
check.
test.
Oh, hold on. I don't have it playing. Give me a sec.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Hello, hello.
Test, test,
Test. Yeah, I don't hear.
test, test, test.
Okay, yeah, we're good with sound.
We're good. Nice.
Okay. So, actually, let me send out the live notification on Facebook. All right. So, hey, everybody, we are live with Comic Cinema Clash. It's Saturday. It's 1 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. I'm in the building with Kelvin today. We're missing Marcelino. We're missing Silent Ace today. A little sad about that, but he's got to deal with some real life stuff. Nothing major, just some stuff he's got to deal with. So we're here today on the show. Um, how you feeling today, Kelvin?
Feeling good, man. I'm really excited to get this conversation started. I mean, this is one that I feel has been happening a lot lately, with Falcon and Winter Soldier kind of stirring the pot a little bit, right?
Right, right, right. Honestly, I feel like the converse. Okay, so I feel like the subtext of the conversation has been trying to been had in the comic medium for some time. We're gonna dig a little bit deeper into what the subtext
Oh
of the
yeah.
conversation is in a minute. But before we actually get into the actual conversation today, I'm gonna put out some quick recommendations on the show. Some things that you probably should be watching because I know they're gonna come up on the show really soon. Um, Invincible, if you haven't watched season 1 of Invincible yet, go ahead and knock that out. I'm telling you, shows like Invincible and the next show I'm going to mention are changing the landscape of what defines a superhero, um, what a world with superheroes in it actually looks like realistically. Um, Jupiter's Legacy, if you haven't watched it, it's dropped on Netflix last night. I just finished it this morning. My God, is that some real heavy hitting things on what realism in superhero life would be. Another one is Watchmen. If you haven't already watched that on HBO, get Watchmen done out of the way. Watchmen pertains to a lot of what we're talking about today, as a matter of factly. If you haven't seen it, but it's also a really different look on what superheroes look like. And I'm sure that these shows and other shows like it, like Umbrella Academy, are really about to be some of the things we're going to talk about on the show soon. So I want you guys to do your homework on those shows. Um, Marvel and DC are not the only people on the chopping block on this show. And honestly, I have more positive things to say about those shows than I have probably negative things, honestly. And the things that the sources they come from and how they're being handled. But those are not today's topics. Today, we are talking about how people of color are represented in comics and their adjacent media. So, movies, television, animation, right? And that's what we're going to get in today. I got some examples that I actually pulled out. I had pulled out lots of examples. I didn't realize the amount of work I was putting ahead of myself to keep it from getting copyright strikes. So I'm gonna get out some examples of the many examples I got out, but we're gonna get into the discussion about that today. I'm gonna let you open with the topic and you know where we want to kick off with that.
Yeah, so I mean it's obviously a really important thing. Especially I mean it's always been an important thing, representation in comics. The way that black characters have been portrayed in comics, throughout history has always been a real touchy subject that really hasn't had a more, I guess, a bigger kind of focal point until now with like just the general public, right? Comic fans have been complaining about this as long as I could remember, right? About representation, the way that we're portrayed, the way that we're written into comics, the way that we're not written into comics. Um, those will be a lot of the things that we'll be talking about today, right? Not just in the past, but even with this week's news of one of the things I want to get into is DC's whole Black Superman thing. I'm sure you've heard at least
Oh
something about
yeah.
that, right?
I got a
Where there's
question
no
for
way.
Michael B. Jordan specifically, but oh yeah, I definitely heard about that. Michael B. Jordan, if you ever listen to this podcast, this is my question I have for you specifically. What is it that is compelling you to take these roles that you know are horrible miscasts and are traditionally white characters? Not that not that we okay. I would rather see us have our own characters or the ones we already have portrayed well
Yes,
by actors like Michael B. Jordan than to take characters like Johnny Storm, whose entire family is white, and
yep,
make him a white character. Take Superman, who is largely the definition of being white and privileged in America, and making him Superman. Um, you know, I, and it's different. Okay, so Superman is different than Captain America. And Captain America isn't an ideal, right? He's the
right.
I, he's the ideal of what all Americans should be, right? Superman is the ideal of white privilege, right? So, like, I don't understand what compels Michael B. Jordan to take on these very controversial, race swapping roles. But
Well, and just to, I guess this may be a good starting point because you nailed it on the head. Is Black people don't want to see white characters turned into Black characters. It defeats the purpose of kind of everything that we've been having a problem with when it comes to representation. So when I heard, oh, they're gonna do a Black Superman movie, I was thinking, oh, this is gonna be Earth 3 Superman, right? Like at
nope,
least that makes
nope,
sense. No, they're trying to turn Clark Kent
can't
into a
into a
black
black
man.
man, right? You know,
That's ridiculous.
it is ridiculous. So okay, so that's it, right? That's the meat of this conversation today. Is what is respectful in representation? How we see ourselves being represented. The core problem is not that I want to see Iron Man is black or Spider-Man is black or Captain America is black or Superman is black. I want to see black heroes being created that honor our cultures, our traditions, our legacies. And I'm sure that Asian Americans want to see the same things. There was a large backlash when Marvel decided to enter, the anime manga, game. They really just wound up making a whole bunch of insensitive and racist, content. You know what I mean? And this is in the
Yeah,
2000s, right? Like, I'm sure that Hispanic people of all descents want to be seen in a positive light in comic books and in, media and adjacent medias. Like, we don't want to take over the roles of your traditional heroes because you're too lazy to make a new stable of heroes, right? We want
yeah,
you to represent the heroes we have powerfully. And one of the things that I'm really going to harp on today is even at the core medium, which is comics, when you look at the art that is relegated to our titles, it's okay. Before I say anything else about this, I'm not discrediting the artist. I'm not discrediting the art styles. I'm not discrediting the art itself, right? I want to delineate the fact that there is a certain style and power that is expected when you read a comic book that is not being delivered to comic books that star the main character when it's a person of color, right? Um, those comics are often given to artists that are cutting their teeth, artists that feel like being experimental, um, artists that feel like being artsy in a comic, right? And it's not that that is necessarily a bad thing, right? However, what we're running into with that is that the same power and sleek look and really top level artists and the attention that should be given to people of colors in comics, their own titles, they're often, say, this is a great space for you to experiment, or this is a great space for you to, make something that's sometimes, a lot of times, very cartoony. And like I said, I put up a lot of examples of what I'm talking about. And again, I'm not knocking the art. I don't think it's representative of what the rest of modern comics look like in comparison. Right? So I'm not saying the art is bad. I'm not saying I don't enjoy it, but it's not powerful, right?
And I remember when you, because we slightly kind of brought that up into conversation last week, and it really did intrigue me. So I started going to look at, that was my little bit of homework that I kind of assigned myself, is to go look into, comics that may fit that example. Because I know you brought up Truth for a little bit, so I decided to go and reread Truth and go and just look at just art in general, and that kind of spills over into writers too. And I came to this realization that I feel like, as I was looking at like the history of Marvel's, black specifically, writers and artists, you notice that they're not really accomplished comic book artists. They were artists that just got brought onto the project, right? Just to fill that black space. And
Yeah.
same with their writers. Some of these aren't comic book writers or have experience writing, fantasy stories or anything like that. They're just a black writer that we needed to,
Yes.
fill the immediate gap of, oh, black people want representation. Go and find somebody that's black to come and write this, Go and
Yes.
find somebody that's black to do. We want quality too, right? Like, we're not just here just to see black people do it, because if that were the case, it's not hard finding, crappy black authors and writers, right? They
And
they
and
do
and
exist.
again, okay, I don't really want to be like they're crappy, right? Because like stories like Truth tackle some really hard issues, right?
Yeah.
Um, story Shuri tackles some really, it's a really good story, right? Like they're writing from a black experience, and a lot of times they're also drawing from what would be a classic black art perspective,
Oh yeah. Yeah,
right?
and it's not to, I guess crappy is the wrong word, but the search for quality isn't the same, right?
Right.
It's very adherently not the same as what you would get with your other standard superhero titles, right? They're just taking whatever they can get. Doesn't mean that they're getting a bad quality product. It's still a professional book. Because
They're
truth,
pandering is what it is, right?
yeah,
So they're like, we want to write a black story, right? We want to get a famous black author to write it instead of a comic book author. We want to get a famous black artist to draw it instead of a comic book artist. And what it delivers to the comic book fan is something jarring and unexpected, right? Something that is
yep.
almost guaranteed not to push the title, right? And it's not that the writing is bad or the art is bad. It is not comic book writing or art, or comic book art, right? It's not what the fans expect when they go to interact with the title. And that's the problem, right? Is that on purpose or not, right? They are sending our titles to the land of experimentation, or in the case of our like Native American, brothers and sisters, or our, Hispanic brothers and sisters, their characters have representation but no titles,
Yeah.
right? So like
And never
Forge,
reoccurring either, right? These are,
exactly. So like Forge, Warbird, Thunderbird, all these people, they've had characters since the 70s. None of them have titles.
No, Echo. You
Echo.
know, I was just talking to a friend about that because Echo has been,
That's a
you know,
positive
she's
Mexican American example that doesn't have their own title.
well, and she's now the Phoenix in Marvel Comics as of like last week. Um, and then they just kind of didn't do anything with it, right? You have an
Right.
opportunity to really give, you know, a character like that spotlight and kind of amplify that representation in a really positive way without it being forced. And now we're just forgetting about it.
And she shined in the
Why?
Ultimates, right? She was, pivotal in the Ultimates. She's the Phoenix now, and they're not going to do anything with that. She's never going to get her own title, right? It's never going to happen.
Oh, not America Chavez, Echo, the Native American face paint deaf.
Oh, okay, yeah, I know you're talking. The one that can
Yeah.
copy anybody's powers, right? Yeah, 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 yeah.
No, she was introduced in Daredevil. She's deaf, fights for made really strong Native American story. Probably one of the coolest Native American superheroes out there. She's got like the Taskmaster kind of photogenic, whatever you do, I can remember and replicate.
Yeah, she can
You know
copy
your fighting
anyone's. Yeah,
style.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah. I was
Yeah,
just watching the
yeah.
video on that. Yeah, but yeah, like okay, American Chavez too though. She's never gonna get a comic, right? She's never gonna get a title. Like, then you have the ones that they have for, you know, because they have to, like Black Panther, Luke Cage,
Yeah.
um, Shangshi, right? And traditionally they've had strong stories, right? Um, Particularly both Luke Cage and Black Panther were created as stick it to the man characters,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like, they were made with the intent of, trying to destroy inequity in both society and in comic books. Like that's why their creators made them. So, there's props to that. There's also like characters like Black Lightning from DC who were created specifically to show a positive black role model in society. Like, not everyone is an ex criminal, you know, turn superhero type of deal, right? Like, this man was a school teacher and a scientist and all around good guy, right? Doing great things for the community well before he became Black Lightning and a superhero, right?
And
So
what a good example, right? Because he was what most of us are, right? Um, it's hard to sit there and fully relate to T'Challa as the king of a fictional nation, right?
right.
Um, but Jefferson Davis, yeah, we definitely can. You know, there are I don't know how many of us have known a black, you know, teacher or you know, just some average guy that kind of got thrown into this, right? He is probably, man, he might be one of DC's like just top most relatable black characters just because of all of the issues that he touches on in a really organic way.
One of the reasons we don't see him more often and he doesn't have a lot of longer running books or things is because he was actually created independently. And the author that created Black Lightning owns the rights to Black Lightning alongside DC.
No way, I did not know that.
Absolutely. So that's one of the reasons you don't see Black Lightning as often as you would like. It's because he's actually part owned by his black creator.
Oh man, well that's a shame because I mean, not to say that they would use him properly, because that's kind of the
Right,
point of
right,
this
right.
conversation,
Organization.
right? But that is a shame that you don't see him more often because I mean, he's just such a unique, you know, character. That does kind of suck that you don't see him more often. Um, but I mean, that is really the point. Is even if they did, you would not see him get a regular release the same way you would Superman, or you know, like Black Panther was a good example because while he is definitely more prevalent now, he's getting a lot more attention right now. That's not going to last forever, right? Like one of the things that scares me is once um, Ta-Nehisi's coach run on Black Panther ends, I feel like we're not going to see him again for like another year or so, right? Whereas I'll never have to worry about that with Spider-Man. He's always going to have a current issue going on, right?
Right.
Even if it means that they have to hire really bad writers, which is kind of what they've been doing over the last 2 years, just to make sure that he gets a number, that he gets a release every single week, then, that's what they're willing to do. Um, that's not gonna be the same when it comes to Black Panther or Luke Cage or Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi's getting a comic now because a movie's coming out, but that's not always going to exist. That'll disappear. Once that movie calms down and the hype has died down, it just sucks to see that happen.
Real quick before we go on with the conversation, I just want to say for everyone who is watching or whoever might be watching, I'm not sure who you are. Welcome to the show. If you have something to say, please chat us. Let us know. We're watching the chat. We would love to hear what you have to say and have you join the conversation. But
Yeah,
yeah,
welcome.
definitely. So you know, that's okay. And then honestly, you can we can say almost everything that we're saying about people of color, about women, and then especially women of color, that trickles down even further, of course, right? So, all minorities largely have a pretty bad shake in as far as representation goes, especially like, when you're talking about what you were talking about, long running content, right? Like,
Yeah.
Wonder Woman has like long running content for a female character, and her book gets canceled every few years, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. Like, why is that, right?
Right.
There's no
Like,
good reason for that.
Jessica Jones, every time her book is put out, it's strong and it's great, and then it's canceled, right?
Yeah.
Daughters of the Dragon, another excellent, comic that can't keep afloat because it just really doesn't have the support. And it doesn't have the support both from the publisher and from the readership, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, because I mean, really, I was hoping after the Iron Fist, TV show was over and that whole Hell's Kitchen thing, I was hoping that we'd get like a Daughters of the Dragon or not TV show, but like comic.
Right.
That if they weren't going to give it a full show, that we would at least get some kind of comic, even if it was a short run. And it just never happened. And I
No.
was crazy disappointed they didn't take advantage of the hype.
So, and then, not okay, so not that I didn't appreciate titles like The Crew, right? Which gives us, all black heroes all the time, right?
Hmm.
But the name is a little insulting, right? The fact it's like, okay, so The Crew is like BET in concept, right? The fact
Yeah,
that it has to exist is insulting.
it is insulting, and really, we wouldn't have this problem if we just got something reoccurring, which is why things like Milestone are so appealing you know to black comic fans, because they know that it's not going to stop. We're going to keep getting it. I listened to this heartbreaking story of this white gentleman went into a comic book store. He's trying to get his daughter in the comics. She's Vietnamese, so half Vietnamese, half white, and she's not really finding anything that looks like the culture that she grew up in. Very strong Vietnamese household. I think like maybe a year and a half ago, DC did a Green Lantern run with a Vietnamese Green Lantern, a little boy and his grandma, right? In the story, this little girl is reading about this little Vietnamese boy, and she's seeing, oh, he's eating the same stuff we eat. Oh, they're actually speaking Vietnamese to each other. Oh, like this is really cool. And she was really getting into it. And then, sure enough, um, a week, after its run of like 10 issues is done, that character's gone, and now this little girl isn't really interested in anybody else because there isn't any more Vietnamese representation. That was it, right? There isn't some brand new comic that she can go and read, and like that lack of constant representation, it doesn't just lose a life, what potentially a lifelong customer, but also just a comic fan in general, right? Not being able to see yourself represented it doesn't just hurt; it makes you just not want to care anymore, right? Um, and that broke my heart to hear, because I think if you're a comic fan of color, you've been in that spot, right? You've been that little Vietnamese girl wondering why you don't get to see more of. When I was a kid, it was, how come we don't get to see Bishop more? Where's more Bishop? Can I get some more
Right.
Bishop?
Okay,
it,
so one of the things I always remember. Okay, so most of you, a lot of you watching or people, I don't know, you might know I'm a writer. One of the things I always recall back to when I'm writing stories, is something my mother told me when I was a kid. She says, everybody wants to be represented in what they read and what they watch.
and that's true.
Like
It's
everybody,
ridiculous.
right?
True.
And she had that conversation with me, you know, talking about how we're not seen anywhere in the media, right? Or if we're seen in the media, we're seen as drug addicts or criminals or pimps or prostitutes or, ex felons trying to change their lives for the better. We're never seen in a positive light. We're almost never seen as true heroes, right? You know, our stories rarely begin with, okay, our stories are rarely Adam Bashir,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah.
So going back to comics, Adam Bashir is amazing representation of what black comics should look like, right? The story was excellently written by a veteran comic writer. The art was powerful and slick, like I would expect out of. And I did pull some images from Adam Bashir's Blue Marvel. I
Oh,
didn't
nice.
I didn't edit them. I didn't have time, but I assure you, they were my examples of what good comic book representing black people should look like. And they went into that with that approach, right? When they were creating the character, they were like, we don't want a character that has these roots. We don't want a character who, you know, is being shown as less than in power and in stature. But we do want him to have to deal with the very obvious obstacle that is his color, right? And the story, I'm not going to talk about it, but the story takes you way back into the 60s and the 70s when racism was very prevalent, and all the way up to the fact of why this man is not a hero in the 2000s when he is possibly the most powerful person on the planet. And, like it was handled with a delicate and true nature. It was drawn powerfully. The entire thing was handled like a comic should be handled, that deals with a black hero and the obstacle of race, right? Where when we pull out examples of truth, while the story definitely dealt with race, it was almost the only thing the story dealt with was race. And then also it's relegated to artsy art and not comic book art. Not anything any comic book reader is going to take seriously. Like from an artistic perspective, I can take it seriously, right? From an artistic perspective, I'm sure Kelvin can take it seriously, right? As he's an amazing artist that can do a whole bunch of styles. I'm sure he appreciates the art style in truth the same way I appreciate it. It's just not comic book art. As a matter of fact, let's go
Right.
ahead. Let's jump over to some of the examples that we're actually talking about here today. So this is Shuri episode or issue 1. You know what? Let me do this. Let me do this real quick. All right. I don't really think think that camera's pointed at my face, but let me go ahead and rectify that. All right. So what episode? This is just easier for me to get to this keyboard. This is Shuri episode 1. Again, before we get into this conversation, we're not knocking any art. Like, this is actually great art, right? It's just not great comic book art, right? There is almost no shading in this artwork. The forms are about as simplistic as you could get. Honestly, Kelvin can tell you I could probably draw Shuri at this level.
Yeah, and I mean, really, it comes down to, you know, how much respect that they want to put into this. Because I think for your casual comic book fan, you know, that's acceptable. It's acceptable enough for you to get the point and move on through a story as quick as they can get it. But when you look at a good example and put it right next to this, the fact that there is no environmental coloring, that there isn't very much attention to detail on the inks here. It shows it's just a disrespect to the character that maybe wasn't even intended, right? I'm sure that, just like what we were talking about earlier, they handed this off to whatever black creators they could, and they just kind of made it, and it looked professional enough, so they were satisfied. But if you put this next to you know, like your Jim Lees of the world, not everybody's Jim Lee, but you're going to see higher attention to detail when it comes to those basic shapes. Whatever, you know, inker that they handled this off to obviously was just trying to get the job done. He uses almost the same density of lines throughout this whole thing. I don't know how I'm not realizing this until now. Now that we're actually talking about it and I'm looking at it, you can start to see the inconsistencies there.
Because they stripped
Because
away the words.
when I'm really reading a professional comic, there's more than just a single tone for mood lighting that gets used here, right? If that's what you're looking for in like a really good comic, right? It'll make you not just want to read it, but like really just stop and breathe and take in the world that's been visually created there. And you don't really get that here, right? The very flat color, yeah. Whoever colored this, probably did it more of an injustice than
Right,
anything. It
right,
seems
right,
like
right.
they just kind of gradient tooled their way through the whole thing.
And
Um,
the editor greenlighted this, right? The editor
yeah,
greenlit this as the project and was like, yeah, this is fine, right? And it is fine, but comic book art is better than fine. It it it's always better than fine. And this is another piece from Shuri, right? I mean, okay, like it's Kirby-esque, I'll give it that, right? But it's the lowest level of Kirby-esque art one could conjure, right? There's no attempt to make any of these characters come off the page at all. They are at best two-dimensional in their imagery, right? Like it doesn't have it doesn't feel hefty or full. Like, it's pretty, but it doesn't feel like comic book art. You know what I mean?
it
Like,
feels like it was just enough to get the job done.
done.
Because I think that this would have passed if this was a long time ago, right? This would have looked a lot better if this was 80s or 90s, obviously.
Right,
But
but it's not. But okay, so here's the
yeah,
latest
this is a
episode.
horrible example.
This is the latest episode of Shuri. This is 2021, right? All right, so now they up, the coloring and the highlights and stuff. That's quality now, but now she looks goofy. And
Yeah, her
right now
face is a little weird there.
they got him with this Uncle Tom grin on his face, right? She looks goofy in every panel. She's the star of the book. Y'all can't get her not looking like an idiot. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
it's just and you know what? I can't even blame the colors here because this is actually a good example of what a good colorist does, right?
yeah. This is the
You can
penciler.
see the multiple effects of, you know, good lighting. They created a real good environment. All of the lighting effects are just like the force hard lighting effects are really nice. This is just like really inconsistent pencil work, because even the ink, great job with the ink, right? Like, you've got a great inker, you've got a great colorist. Whoever did the actual foundational drawings of this must not have been having a good day.
Yeah, but this is what the whole entire issue looks like, right? Then we get to truth, right? And truth is truth is actually quite beautiful, but it's also not comic book art, right? Um,
Yeah, there was even a line in Truth where, one of the suitors was like, "Oh, they don't want to see, us be Captain America. They just want to, Captain. What did he say? Um, Captain Americoon, right?" And I
yeah,
was like, you know what? Captain Americoon feels like the whole kind of, theme behind the way that this visually looks. And that's not to say it's bad art. It's great art. It's black art. You see this kind of art style in
in
tons of
in
old
Black
black art.
America, right?
Yeah, so I get why they chose to go with this. I even went to go look up the artists behind this and the writers, just to kind of look at maybe previous works that they did, and it's consistent. It makes sense, but this isn't what you would ever see like Iron Man look
I
like,
mean, look
right?
at these poor photoshopped cue balls. These are straight up
Yeah,
vector art cue balls with like they didn't even bother to put an outline on them to make them not look
no,
like vector art.
it would
Like
have taken 2 seconds, like straight out 2 seconds.
this is this is poor, right? And I'm not even talking about the style of it, which is not consistent with comic culture, right? Again, beautiful art is just not consistent. No, okay, this is not going to attract comic book readers. This is not going to make truth fly off the shelves,
Yeah.
right? And that's the point, right? Is that this art, wow, very classic African American art, is not going to make comic book readers, the core audience, buy this.
It all comes down to that respect thing, right? Because if the conversation was to be had about Superman or Iron Man or Captain America, which arguably this is a Captain America book, their main series titles, those ongoing ones, you would not see that type of art making it into what's currently being sold because they know it's not going to make money. This is kind of what we were getting into earlier, where it's, you know what, there's a black artist, there's a black writer, let them create whatever they produce is good. We can say we got our representation points out the way, right? We're doing it right. Yeah, the story was good, the art was good, but I would like to see it respected more, right? And that's what's being missed overall is there's a respect thing in the industry that's just not being followed. Whether it's that truth thing or Michael B. Jordan maybe being Clark Kent, right? We're missing the point. We're missing a respect point.
All right. So here's this is from Black Panther this year, maybe
Oh, this
last
is my
year.
jam. Yeah.
Now, this is actually really good art, right? I'm not knocking
Yeah.
the art, but it still falls victim to being relegated to experimental versus what you would see in another comic book, right? Like this is artsy. This is not comic book art, right? It is not that it's bad art because it's actually really dope. These panels are cut great. The action is actually really good on this page. But it's still artsy, right? With a lot more focus on the art and the artsiness of it than the main character T'Challa, right? Um, you know, like and really this is actually a really good story too. And it's easy enough to read on the eyes, right? But it still falls short. And then okay, so here, this is all right. Here's a good example of what I'm talking about. So here we have Black Panther, and this is great comic book art, right? Like this is great comic book art. The name of this is Back to Africa. Why is he dressed in European armor?
That's always been a real big killer for me because they love to bring this armor back every now and then. Um, and they always do it with the Black Knight sword, which is what that is
I
right
know.
there. That's not just some random. Yeah, for the people who don't know, they always love to kind of bring this back, and I've never liked it because for all of the very just forced, you know, like African things that you see in Black Panther's world, even when the people are walking on the street and you see this high tech, like you can feel like the African in there. But for some reason, they have this really weird need to bring back this very Black Knight European armor, and I've never liked it.
And you know, it literally detracts from everything Black Panther is to put him in European style armor, right?
Yeah, because I mean, it takes away from like the thing that makes Black Panther special is his innovation, right? Take away the fact that he's, you know, the king of a nation and all that. The reason why people want him and need him is because he is probably the most innovative creator in in the whole Marvel, you know, planet Earth, right?
Right,
Like,
right, right.
there's nobody doing what he's doing.
But this,
So to take away his innovation by giving him something that doesn't even come from his culture, like, who thought this up?
but this is great. This is a great example of comic book art, but it gets sent to put in Black Panther and European armor to whiteify him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, we can respect him now because he's doing something European. So let's go ahead and, you know, put our top pencils and our top colors on that, and let's make this look great because we're gonna put him in, you know, some European armor, and we're doing something white with him. So let's give it, you know, the old Marvel shine, you know. And I don't have, okay, one, I don't have any examples from DC because I really, DC's kind of whacked me. I don't read it. I'm not going to support it. Nobody's supporting it. Let's put it that way. Nobody's supporting DC right now on the comic book reader joint.
Well,
Their
and
comic
not
book
to say
reading
that
is
we
whack.
couldn't sit here and talk about that because the way that we got into this last week, right? The way that they don't represent it's the same respect thing, right? They don't represent their black characters almost at all, right? Marvel at least has this overall theme of, oh yeah, we could talk about this all day.
Right, right, right,
But
right.
you know, Marvel at least, while they may not be doing an amazing job at representing, they at least know that it's important, right? They are at least employing a variety of black authors and
Absolutely,
artists,
absolutely.
and they're trying, right? They know that they're not gonna, it's not gonna happen overnight, but I for sure in my adult life have never had to worry about, is Marvel ever going to hire another black artist or black writer to tell black stories? Because they're there, they're not hitting the mark quite yet, but the progress is at least there, right?
Okay, okay. So before we talk about this piece, who drew this? Do you know who drew
I
this?
don't know who drew this, yeah, but I do remember this.
No, no. Look at it. Who drew this? You know who drew this. What does this look like? What cartoon does this look like?
I'm missing it.
So it's like Dexter's Laboratory and Powerpuff Girls and Samurai Jack and Primal. Jenny Trachowski drew this. Okay.
Really?
Yeah. So this is Luke Cage's Dig It, takes place in the 70s. Jenny
Mm-hmm.
Trachowski drew it. Now, before I say anything else, I love his art. I love this piece of art. All right. So before I say anything else, I want you all to understand that. Right. I am a huge fan of everything that he does. However, this is also relegating Luke Cage to a cartoon because that's what
Yeah.
Jen Dutrachowski draws are cartoons, right? Um, and he draws some emotional content like Primal. If you haven't watched Primal yet, it is powerful. They don't use a single word in Primal, and it is some of the most powerful emotional content I've ever watched in my
Yeah,
life.
that's just art. Do yourself a favor and go watch that.
Go
That is
watch
just
it.
pure art.
It's pure art. It's just beautiful. Everything about the man's work is enjoyable, including this piece. This is an awesome piece of art. Don't get me wrong, but it is relegated to Luke Cage. It's relegated Luke Cage to a cartoon, not a comic book superhero. Right? He is now a cartoon, just like everything else that Dennis Petrowski draws in this style that he draws things in, because what he draws is cartoons, right?
Yep.
Um, and that's what they've done here with this piece, um, or the whole series of Luke Cage Dig It, right? They sent him to Cartoon Land. Um,
Yeah.
Here, Power Man and Iron Fist. Also, this is a really good piece of art. I'm not knocking the piece of art, but it's also cartoony when
Very cartoony.
compared to the rest of what Marvel presents for us. And as a matter of fact, I pulled some other examples out of here. And one of the things that I didn't get to edit was some of the shots with Daniel Rad with his mask off, where they flatten his nose in some strange way and kind of make him look a little Asian-y for some unknown reason.
Oh, come on. And and here's the thing for anybody watching this, these aren't like old examples. Like
These
all
are
of
all
these are
from
very recent comics, right?
all of these are from like 2017 or higher, right? I didn't
Yeah, I
pick.
was just gonna
Right.
say, like this comic, this example right here, I think was maybe 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So these aren't like, oh, Marvel's learned their lesson now, they figured this out now. Maybe that was how it was in the 80s or 90s. No, no, no,
No,
no.
no, no,
These
no,
are
no.
all things that are still happening
Yeah.
today.
These are all really recent. These are all very recent examples. Okay. So this is actually decent
This is good.
enough art, right? But the action piece, right? The action piece is in question. Doesn't it look awkward to you?
It does look a little awkward. But I'm not gonna knock it too much because whoever did this, I mean, talk about a fine attention to detail with everything, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yes, yes.
this comes down to like anatomy and posing was maybe a little bit off for this, right? Like his body for
I,
sure
I
looks a
pulled
little.
I pulled a few more examples out of Falcon as well. I didn't get a chance to edit. A lot of a lot of the art was awkward, so it was detailed,
Mhm.
but it was awkward. And how did it get past the editor? Right? How did the editor greenlight it when it's just not the right kind of anatomy, not exactly the right posing? They wouldn't have let that get away with Spider-Man. They would have been like, you know what, you got to take this and redraw this again. Like that's not gonna work, right?
Yeah, and it's a really weird thing because while this is this is really what I would love to see, right? This quality of art is what I would have loved to see for really all of these characters that we're talking about, right? If Isaiah Bradley was drawn like this, I guarantee you more people would have been interested in it, right? If
Right.
Truth was drawn like this, and you had like these high action, high detail, like this is inked really well. Whoever
No,
did the inking on this is
it's inked and it's
freaking
colored really well,
fantastic,
and most
right?
of the anatomy is fantastic, right?
Yeah,
It is just those type of this is it's just an awkward posing, right? It's
it's
almost one
just
that
really weird anatomy. Yeah.
it doesn't really make much sense, and the editor should have been like, you know what, this image doesn't make a lot of sense. I realize you put a lot of work into it or whatever, but it don't make no sense. Like
Actually, like really, for a guy with wings to like kind of come in, it makes zero sense
it
for
makes
him to be
zero
in that
sense.
pose,
Like
right?
why? Like you can't do like literally from a flying position. You can't do anything from that pose. Like
Mm-mm.
what are you doing? Right? But they just green lighted like whatever, cool. Whatever.
Yeah,
Right? All right. So Daughters of the Dragon. This is actually really good art too. This is really good art. But still kind of on the experimental side comparatively, right? And then
yeah.
the rest of this issue takes on like six different art styles, and it has a reason in the storytelling, but it's still you feel the heavy impact of what they allow and don't allow when dealing with characters that are white and characters that are not, right? Like there's so many different art styles in this one issue, it will physically make you ill.
And they love to do that with stories that they think aren't really gonna matter too much, right? Where they're just perfectly fine just getting it out there. Oh, go on ahead and just have, 6 or 7 different artists kind of do this over 10 issues. As long as it gets out, then that's all that really matters. We're not really concerned with quality. And that's not to say that white characters don't get treated the same way,
Because
and
there's
there's an
plenty
outrage
examples.
for it, right? But yeah, the consistency like that it happens with lesser known characters like Misty Knight here, right? Or even Black Panther and others, right? It's way higher, right? That they do things like that, that the lack of respect is there, which is why I think it gets outraged whenever it does end up being a mainline comic. People talk about it and they're like, "Whoa, why did they draw Superman like this? Something needs to happen there. Da, da, da. This isn't what we're used to." Well, unfortunately, if you're looking specifically for representation of black people in comics, this is what we're used to. This is
Right.
very much what we're used to. Um, we don't really have the big opportunity to complain about high quality much, just because we don't get too many actual books that are made in high quality, right? We'll take what we can get at this point. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be addressed.
And then, all right. So my last example I got to edit out, and when I mean edit, I removed the words. If you haven't noticed from all these pictures,
Mm-hmm.
um, is Shangshi, right? And again, this art is actually decent enough art. It's just not representative of comic book art. It's not sleek and powerful like that. It's again, it's artsy and it's experimental, and it's good art, but it's not comic book art. It's close to it. It's got a real it's got a real fine line on what it's trying to be. But then I also have some issues with things like his nose.
Yeah, it's not an Asian guy's nose.
It's not, you know, it's like they it's like they couldn't figure out if he was Asian or white, you know. Um and I
Which
think that's
has
kind of
been a
poor
problem for
representation
Shang-Chi.
for yeah, actually that's been a huge problem for Shang-Chi. He's he's either been so Asian that he's a stereotype, or they can't figure out, you know, what they want to make him, white or Asian, or they give him some awkward color, right? Like
You know what it is really, because this all boils down to, one of the big underlying solutions to all of this is start letting the people who come from these countries write in, because a lot of Shang-Chi's comics have been written by just white people, right? So they don't really know how to draw this. They just draw him as a white dude that can do kung fu.
right,
Um, and the stories are just like, you would swear that you're reading Agents of Shield or something, right? You don't really get an Asian story in Shang-Chi's comics, even the current one, because that example was from Shang-Chi's current run that they're
right,
doing right now.
right now,
And me reading it, I just completely stopped reading it because I'm like, this isn't interesting. This doesn't feel like what I feel Chinese people would tell an Asian, Shang-Chi story, right? This feels like Agents of Shield with with an Asian dude, right?
right. And that's it though. It goes back to that respect, right? When they okay, instead of Marvel saying, let me find African American comic book writers. Let me find Asian American comic book writers. Let me find Hispanic American comic book writers, right? They take one extreme route or the other. They either leave it in the hands of white writers to flesh out the story, or they go find writers that have nothing to do with comics and everything to do with culture.
Yeah. You know who's a really good at, like, Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah.
He is not a comic book writer, but he has written, some very strong cultural books, right? In Black Panther's case, definitely go read that because it's
It's
like
good.
one of Black Panther's best runs, if not the best, in my opinion. But they got lucky there, right? They got really lucky that this guy just really wanted to make a good comic storyline and that he was driven by trying to respect the
That he was
industry. And
also a fan of comics.
yeah, they got lucky that he wasn't just another black writer that he actually really wanted to make not a book but a comic, right? Like a full, like high quality comic. We're not, and this is, I don't think this is a problem we're going to see fixed anytime soon, because as these kind of this low quality kind of comic happens, not to say, like you were saying, not to say that the stories are bad, that the art is bad, it's just not what comic book fans have come to appreciate when it comes to high quality, Jim Lee kind of style work, right? I don't think we're going to see it happen with these books of color, because people of color have just kind of accepted bad art, right? Like, we haven't learned to really look for quality, um, the way that, like, it is inside of these main comic book things. And it's not to say like we're incapable, like that's not what I'm saying at all. It's just our interest isn't being kept long enough, because these books are short running for us to really start to be able to digest them the way that we would other forms of media, right? To really break them down and really have that same outrage that we would if Iron Man was drawn the way that like Truth was drawn, right? Nobody was pissed about that because the audience is so small. They didn't have to worry about that. That's why I just put it out, right?
I think as a symptom of a greater ill, what you were talking about earlier about our level of acceptance, it's not just in comic books that where we find ourselves just accepting what we're given because we were finally given something, right? I think in all forms of media and all aspects of our lives, I think we deal with that as people of color. I think you know we struggle so hard to be seen in media that when we finally, see an actress or actor or of color, get an accolade or a role, or we finally see books like Truth come in to light, which, for the story, it was imperative that stories like Truth come into play, right?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Because we're finally getting access to these things in every part of our lives. We're just thankful to get it. And it stops us from questioning the quality of what we're getting, right? So, you know, when I'm looking at it, right, like I'm like, oh wait, Shuri and Truth. Let's take Shuri and Truth because I got my biggest arguments with those. To be honest with you, right?
Well, and really, you know what? Another good representation of this, that might be a little controversial to some people, just to go exactly on what you're talking about, is really this Falcon and America Winter Soldier show.
Absolutely.
That did, the imagery was forced, right? We had this truth conversation. Truth was what that whole show was about, right? You had this representation, it was there, and then instead of kind of wrapping it together in that final episode with like really good, um, with story building the same way, it didn't get a good ending, right? And I'm sure that there's a lot of people that disagree with me there, but the kind of forced imagery of, hey, you guys want that representation, here it goes, right? Like, we got the job done, okay, but like still there's some things that I wanted to see, right? Like, there's some more. You guys like had this really good story building up, and then we're somehow redeeming John Walker. We're not really touching on Bucky's character growth as much as I would have liked. Like, now we're kind of getting away from telling a good story to just, we're going to give you the representation so that we can get it out the way, right?
Okay, so just to catch you guys up on what we're talking about, the backstory. Truth is the story of Isaiah Walker and how the government used black soldiers to develop the super soldier serum that they were, trying to recreate from Steve Rogers. Okay. Um, if you missed it in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, even if you were watching it and you missed it, the old black man that Bucky takes Sam to is Isaiah Thomas. He is the main character of the comic Truth. right? So I've been talking about truth a lot since last week episode, and I want you guys to have some perspective on what the story of truth is. It is actually a very powerful story. I suggest you all read it, um, experience it for yourself. Do know that the art does come from a very classic African American art background, right? And that it's, while as a comic book fan and reader, juxtaposed to other comics, I realized that it is less quality than what would be put out for Spider-Man or Iron Man or Superman or these other titles. The art is actually a fantastic representation and celebration of classic African American art. So I do want to put that on the table. That truth capsulated in itself is a beautiful piece. I think if truth
Mhm.
would have came from any separate entity other than Marvel or DC, I would have had different feelings about truth.
Yeah.
I feel like with Marvel being the editor of truth, that they didn't respect the project that they had laid out with the style of art they had chose. I
Which is really unfortunate because Robert Morales, he wrote that thing really good, and really take a chance on that because it was only like eight or nine issues. It was a really short read, but man, like what powerful writing for like those 8 or 9 issues to have gotten his point across. And it makes me wonder if they were just like, hey, you know what? Instead of giving you like 8 or 9 issues, what if we gave you 20, right? What we really would have saw, because there was a lot of truth that felt rushed, like they were just trying to get to the point. Like those like 8 issues went by really, really quick
yeah,
when you're reading it, right? And it's I'm sure Marvel didn't intend to say, hey, we're only going to want to represent you guys for like a little bit, right? I'm
but
sure
they
that they
also
thought that
didn't
they were
care.
right. And it boils back down to that respect thing, right? It didn't get the respect that something else got, right? It's funny because the whole thing was that Isaiah Bradley just kind of got and forgot, and that was wrong, and then they just kind of let us all forget about it, with such a short run of the book, right?
Right.
It's not something that really gets thought about. Like they fell into their own trap, right? Um, I feel like if we would have gotten more of that, or even Sam Wilson's run as Captain America in the comics. My dude got like a year as Captain America before we had to go back to Steve
Oh,
Rogers.
all the
They
minorities got a year of being their perspective. Jane Foster was Thor for a year.
Yep.
Kiki, what was her name? Riki, uh, who was
Oh, Riri.
Ironheart? Yeah, Riri was Ironheart for a year. Frank Cho was the Hulk for a year. You finally get a Korean superhero, and he's going after. I mean, he's
Oh,
still around.
Amadeus.
Yeah,
And you know
Amadeus Show.
what?
Yeah,
That one hurts because for the same reason I gave with the Vietnamese girl in
right,
Green
right,
Lantern,
right, right,
that
right.
was my son reading Amadeus Cho. My son is half Korean, right? So we're reading Amadeus Cho, and dudes in a van eating kimchi. The Korean culture is like it's there in that book, and then all of a sudden it's just gone. So there goes a lot of my son's representation in comic books because that was it, right? But to kind of get back to the point, right? They didn't even care about writing it off good. Sam Wilson, when he gave back the shield, it was like glossed over in like 3 panels, and it's like, you know what, like obviously you guys weren't ready to end his run. Just keep it going. It doesn't have to be like a single like year or something like that. We can just have a black Captain America be Captain America for a while. Like they were
Or
real quick to
or
get
they
Steve
can go
Rogers back in
back
that chair.
to the original statement, and they can create characters for us, and then treat them with
Yeah.
the same respect that they give characters like Spider-Man and Captain America. you know
Yeah. and
we mentioned the
and really,
Milestone imprint, and I hate to say imprint because Milestone didn't start off as a DC imprint. DC
no,
purchased Milestone and then buried it,
that's right.
right? And that's one of the most offensive things that's happened in comic books as far as I'm concerned. And I'm going to talk about that as truthful as I can. So, you know, I, I don't know why I can't remember his name right now. But
Icon.
no,
You
no,
thinking of
no,
Icon? Oh.
the creator of Milestone.
Mm.
He's okay. So one, there's a few things about him. He's got like 3 different degrees. One of them in science. He is athlete and a writer, and the man is like 6'6" or something like that. Like he's just everything about him is amazing, right?
Mm.
But then he also invented an entire comic book universe full of black superheroes living in black environments, dealing with issues that we dealt with, right? And the moment his property started taking steam, DC purchased his property under their imprint, promised that they were going to keep his universe alive, and then took 2 characters out of it and buried it. Right?
And
And that's in the man to his grave. Like it literally started a cycle of him being sick and then him dying. Like I've prospectively from the outside blamed DC Publishing, for this man's death.
really, I mean, the disrespect behind it, because if you weren't gonna, why buy it if you're not gonna let it get the respect that it deserves? It almost felt like they were just trying to take it off of the chopping block, right?
Yep, yep.
Buy it because we have the money, and then kill it so that we can keep telling the stories that we wanted to tell. They never really gave Milestone a chance, and that's where I'm nervous about. They're because I'm sure you heard Milestone is coming back.
Yeah.
I think this year, right? And like the designs behind Static that they've shown get me really excited, because you see, you know, the high quality work that we're talking about is what Static looks like, right? The concept art for Icon is that it makes me excited as a black kid who grew up reading those comics. But then the back of my head is like, these are still DC properties, right?
And,
They're
and
not letting Milestone be their own thing.
right, they're using them for effect, right? They're gonna
Yeah,
release the Milestone comics. They're gonna have like a run of 10 to 12, and then they're gonna drop them like a bad habit. After they felt
yeah,
their quota being politically correct, right?
yeah. Which
Um,
is it's the Michael B. Jordan as Clark Kent thing, right? Let's do it so that we can say that we're relevant in the conversation, and then we're just going to completely abandon that.
and let's
Um,
talk about that. Why isn't Michael B. Jordan being cast as Icon?
Yeah, and that was, I've been looking at a lot of black perspectives for that this week, as black people have kind of risen up and, very collectively have voiced their displeasure on this. And that's been what everybody's been saying. Why couldn't we just get Icon? Black people we don't have to have Miles Morales be Spider-Man, right? Miles Morales could have been something completely different related, that we don't need him to be Spider-Man. We don't need him to be Superman. We don't need a black Green Lantern. You can have
We could
black
have
people
made
come and
any
create their own
other
character.
mythology for Miles Morales, a character who, in concept, absolutely needed to be created. A black Hispanic kid living in New York is representative of a lot of the kids that are growing up in that city right now,
Oh yeah, that's
right?
Harlem.
That's Harlem.
Harlem is
Exactly.
black and Puerto Rican.
That's, so not that Miles Morales didn't need to be created, right? The personage of Miles Morales needs to be created. Him taking over the role of Spider-Man, and then honestly, when you look at his power sets and all, he's not even really Spider-Man, right? He's something different anyway, right?
Yeah.
So why did we have to slap the title of Spider-Man on him?
And it was this really weird debate, right? Because you had a lot of people, and it still gets had today, right? You have a lot of people where I've heard these really racist, we don't need a black Spider-Man. Why are there two now? We don't need two. You know what? I guarantee you most black people are gonna agree with you. We don't need two
And
Spider-Man.
why is
That
there a
could have
black
been somebody
Spider-Man?
else.
Right.
Yeah, that could have been somebody else. What that is we need to still push our narrative, right? We still need to make sure that we're um, selling books, right? We're trying to make money. We're not worried about how you're represented, or we're not respecting it the way that
Right.
how you're represented, but we're just going to do it, right? And this is going to make money. It's going to be identifiable for people who buy these books on a regular basis. So we're more worried about that than actually giving the respect to a character um, that you care about, right? That you might actually care about, which is Miles Morales, not Spider-Man, but Miles Morales. Yes, we care about. We like him. We like his attitude. We like his style. We like all the cultural things that come along with that. I love the fact that this has been written by colored people and that you really do get like a genuine colored story from Miles Morales. I don't need him to be Spider-Man though.
Right. I love all the cultural aspects of the stories that come with Mom Morales. I love seeing his Puerto Rican mom in the kitchen. I love seeing his interactions with his black father
Mm-hmm.
and his uncle. I love those things. Like they're great. I think, making the Prowler his uncle was a genius move.
Oh yeah.
I think the Prowler was a immensely underused Spider-Man villain anyway. And how forgotten he was a great way to add him to the Miles Morales fixture. But he could have been anything other than Spider-Man, right?
Yeah.
Um, Riri Williams could have been anything other than an Iron Man knockoff, right? Um,
Yeah, and talk about a character who didn't get respected because Ironheart is still around, just very rare in spurts.
right. And okay, so let's talk about Riri Williams. She had a special kind of backlash, right? So
Oh
she
yeah.
got caught up in two things, right? So she got caught up in Gamergate, and I'm going to explain Gamergate in a minute for all of you who don't understand how Gamergate applies to women in media. But we're going to dive into that a little bit. But she got caught
Yeah.
up in Gamergate, and she also got caught up in the backlash of Marvel's conversion of their main superheroes into minorities, right? And then she got caught up in being double minority in that wrap up, right? So she was both black and a woman in
A
that
woman.
that crossover. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to Gamergate real quick. So Gamergate was an internet conspiracy that was going on that started in gamer chat rooms that were saying women were trying to take over video games and media with their representation, and that they were in that it was becoming unfair to essentially Christian white men who fear that they're having a lack of representation right now. And that's a real thing that they're dealing with. They feel like they're being pushed out of the media and politics and these things when they don't realize that they've had control over these institutions for the entire time of the institution's life, right? So
Yeah.
now they feel like a minority, they feel threatened. But Gamergate was about a bunch of pimply face, you know, never got incels, right? Because there's a word for them. Pimply faced incel white dudes who were screaming that women were taking over their roles in video games and television and media in general, right? And that essentially it was a female agenda that was meant to push out men, um, which is maybe true in some ways, but really it's just a bunch of BS, right? Women, like people of color, have every right to push into media and get represented in a way that they haven't been previously. If you don't understand that, then I don't know. Is it forcible? Sure. Do I blame them? Absolutely not. Like, yo, we got to do the same thing, right? Like, I understand. Like that one chick that came up to Dave Chappelle, she was like, "We hurt too," and he was like, "I get that y'all hurt," and she was like, "We hurt too." He's like, "But it's not the same thing." She was like, "It is the same thing." He was like, "No, white lady, it's not the same thing. I do get it. Y'all hurt too. Y'all gotta push a whole bunch of barriers, right?" But poor Riri
Mm-hmm.
Williams, right? She had to push all those barriers, and she's a fictional character. She had to push past the barrier of being a woman. She had to push past the barrier of being black. She had to push past the barrier of a whole bunch of people feeling like they were now no longer being represented in the media, crying because their heroes got replaced with people that other people might be able to look up to, right?
and really talk about exposing people, because she did it's not to say that there aren't black women who have been, you in my background image, you've got Spectrum, you've got Misty Knight, you've got Storm. That's not to say that they don't exist, but man, talk about exposing how toxic this conversation really got with Riri Williams, because all that happened was that she took up the mantle of Iron Man for a very brief period of time, and people lost their shit over Iron Man not being a white guy.
Yeah.
If you read people didn't even read the comic. Tony Stark was perfectly fine with all of this happening. He was impressed with all of it happening. For people who are fans of the character of Tony Stark, you would have appreciated why Riri Williams existed, right? Why she was there. These aren't comic book fans because they didn't read it. Because if they were, at the same time that Riri Williams became Iron Man or Ironheart, so did Doctor Doom. And nobody had a single problem with Doctor Doom being Iron Man, right?
Yeah.
Nobody had a problem with another white guy picking up the mantle of Iron Man, but everybody lost their shit over Riri Williams. And I always thought that was funny, because it's like, man, this situation, her existing, exposed this problem in a way that was just like chef's kiss perfect, right?
Honestly, her
This is,
alongside Jane Foster becoming Thor.
yeah, exact same conversation, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
women just can't get a break, man.
Those two conversations. Look, no one batted an eye with Amadeus Troy being a Hulk. No one said anything.
Mm-mm.
No one
Nope.
cared because he was still a man. No one really said anything when Sam Wilson became Captain America. It was a little, but no one really
Oh yeah,
said
there was still
anything.
a disturbance. Yeah, there were still people
Right.
complaining.
But it wasn't as bad as Jane Foster becoming Thor and Riri Williams becoming Ironheart. Like that, because both of those things were happening during Gamergate, which you have to understand. Like these things were
Yeah,
happening and they were coinciding, right?
but they
So,
helped expose it in such a good way,
oh
because
my God,
really, Jane Foster as Thor was fucking amazing.
fire.
Excuse me, but like,
Yeah, it was fire.
she and not only that, it gave Odinson Thor one of the best self-reflection moments he's had in the book Unworthy Thor, right? Seeing him stripped without it and seeing her with it wasn't some forced feminism thing. It gave you actually good writing, like really, really good writing around why this is there, right?
Right.
It didn't it they could have made it this forced feminism movement about Jane Foster picking this thing up. And they didn't. They actually still told a really organic story. And that's why I was saying, these people who are complaining, they're not comic book fans. Because
No, they're not. They're hate mongers in the media,
yeah,
right? They're people who are latching on the sensationalist stories that they're seeing and then crying that they're being displaced,
hmm
right? And they're fear panderers, right? And they're pandering to other people's fears about being displaced. And they're not comic book, because comic book fans didn't have a problem with this, right? The media, Twitter, Facebook, they had a problem with this, right?
yeah.
The same reason they got a problem with, you know, 4, 5 racist Dr. Seuss books that no one has ever heard of being removed from, like the books. Okay, the books on the Dr. Seuss list of books that got removed. I've not heard of one of those books ever in my life.
I didn't even know they existed until they got brought up.
Me neither, right? So for people to be crying that they're canceling Dr. Seuss is ridiculous. No one knows the title of those books. No one's ever. I look. I thought I had a large collection of Dr. Seuss libraries, both a large collection of Dr. Seuss books, both when I was a kid and my kids were kids. I'd never heard of those books. Never heard of those books. Like they didn't cancel Green Eggs and Ham or The Cat in the Hat or One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish.
No,
They canceled some titles I literally cannot even remember. Like they're
and
long and weird titles.
it was of their own accord. They did it because they realized, hey, this might be a problem for us in the future. Let's get, like, we know
Right.
what time period we live in. get rid of these things before somebody finds out they exist. Right?
Right. And no one's trying to cancel your past or remove you culturally, but um okay, so let's take a step back to the earlier conversation where we're like we don't as people of color, we don't necessarily need to see, a black Iron Man, right?
Mm,
Or a black Spider-Man. But I understand Marvel's position, right? They have these titles that they know make money,
yeah.
right? They know that they're the ones that their readers are coming to see, right? And instead of trying to make a whole new test market in bed of new staple heroes that have to somehow fit into an existing universe, um and answer the questions of why they didn't exist before or what's going on, it is easier largely to pass the mantle on, right, of an existing
Yeah.
character. I That's not lost on me, right? Like, I get that, but it's not
Well, and to kind of get to
necessarily.
that point, though, too, because I meant to talk on that earlier, too. Just to be fair, passing on the mantle, they know it's going to make them money from people who are fans of the characters, right? Um, by no means did I ever mean that there was something insidious going on at Marvel or malicious of, only represent these characters, in this light, right? Like make this character a minority just to, because at the same time, when those characters did get represented, not Miles Morales, but Riri Williams, Jane Foster, even Amadeus Cho, they did not get supported by communities of colors the way that they were supposed to,
No.
right? You had black, really all colored comic book fans pleading with people, go buy these books, go show them that this stuff really really matters to us, and it didn't happen in the way that it was supposed to, right? Whereas, white comic book fans are going to buy comic books, right? They're
Well,
always
you know
going to
what?
be buying the comic book characters so that they're
Okay, so
represented.
there's another conversation that you are having right now, and I don't think you're realizing that you're having, right? So, one of the things that is a roadblock, both for the publishers and for the fans, is this. In our communities, there's not as many fans of comics as we think there are,
Yeah.
right? So, one, in color communities, it's being fanciful is often frowned upon, right? So not being grounded in reality, enjoying things like fiction, science fiction, comic books, that's not with the larger scope of our people have time to deal with, right? They are
Hmm.
out there trying to survive, right? They don't have time to read comics and watch anime and indulge in flights of fancy, right? So there's not as large of a market of colored readers that we would need to support shifts in, passing over the mantle to, you know, readers, characters of color, women characters. And the same thing with women, right? Women's Women are not supported in the idea, and people of color are not supported in the idea that it's okay to enjoy comic books, animation, anime. That's literally the realm of little white boys and 20 something year old white men, and that's the demographic, right? That's what it's written to, that's what it's marketed to. Um Even when you look at like the independent comics, like um Invincible and Jupiter's Legacy, right? Like there's positive black characters. I would say specifically in Invincible, Amber is possibly the most powerful female person of color character I've ever seen constructed. Like Amber is the most impressive female person of color character ever penned, right? But the focus is still, well, honestly, okay, okay, let's talk about Invincible real quick, because Invincible is actually a story about a person of color. Because Invincible,
It is.
his human mother is Asian, right? As a
That's
matter
right.
of factly, she's voiced by Sandra Oh, and he's voiced by Stephen Yeun, right?
Yep.
So all his human DNA is Asian. Let's talk about that, right? Actually, let's you know what? I really wasn't giving Invincible enough credit when I started this conversation. Really had to consider this. Invincible is the most inclusive thing I have encountered in comic bookdom in a long time, right? Um, the gay best friend is perfect, right? Like, he is not overdone in gay culture, but he does not ignore it, right? He is
And it
openly
doesn't
and
need to be,
proudly
right?
homosexual, right?
Yes, and it doesn't need to be. It's not forced. He is just there because that's how all of us are. We are just
Just
there,
there,
right?
right? And he, like, okay, he is brave, and he is compassionate, and he's funny, and he's poignant, and he always says the exact right thing at the exact wrong time. Like, he's a great character. Amber is built with insight and clarity and a strength beyond imagination. Like, the character of Amber is so strong at her core, right? Like, I don't want to ruin the story by getting into the things she says and does, for the people who haven't watched it. But her insight on life, her insight on people, the things she will accept and she won't accept in her life, like, we should all take examples from Amber. Like,
Mm.
that is a strong, strong character. Like, Invincible's mom, that is a strong okay, all the female characters in Invincible are powerful. The ones that have powers and the ones that don't. Invincible's mom is powerful. Like, that is a strong female character. Like, Kirkland wrote really, really strong foundational characters, period. The whole cast of Invincible is impressive. Even characters like Rexplode, who is a consummate Chad, like, he's a straight up douche baby. He is the best construct of what that looks like. Like, you
Oh,
know,
definitely.
you you
We've all known that guy,
you
right?
feel that, but you feel his pain though, right?
Mhm.
Like, you understand that Rexplode's life was shite, right? And that he outwardly expresses that, right, through frustration and angst.
Because
Like,
that's what those people do in real life. That is what those people do. It's a ridiculously human story.
no, it's man, oh my, look, yo, Invincible is great. But then you have like Jupiter's Legacy. While it's got some strong black characters in it, um, again, the focal point is, whitedom. Like,
Mm.
honestly, it don't get no more white privilege than the superhero family. You know what I'm saying? Like, the father, the mother, the two kids, and the brother all have superpowers. Like,
Mm.
you don't get no more privilege than that. Like, as a matter of factly, the larger part of the conversation is their level of privilege. Um, and while it's about their level of superhero privilege, you can easily translate that to their level of white privilege,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
Okay, I know it just came out last night, but I'm telling you, Jupiter's Legacy is okay. So they are changing the landscape largely of what superheroes look like, um, because superheroes wouldn't look like they do in Marvel and DC's world, in our world. They just wouldn't. They wouldn't take on that appearance,
Yeah,
and
it's
things
not going to
like,
translate the same way.
right, things like Umbrella Academy and Watchmen and Jupiter's Legacy and Invincible, they're really The Boys. they're really more realistic looks of what it would be if superheroes lived among us.
Yeah, like actually we're here. What are the, social consequences of
Of
what these
right,
characters would actually be like? And I think that's why they're so popular, right? Because I think everybody's always wondered that. We've never seen that on screen, right?
right. And yeah, all of these. If okay, so we're gonna, you know what, we're gonna have a we're gonna have a conversation about this real soon. Maybe the next episode or so. Um,
Yeah, I know Ace wanted to kind of get into that too, so that
yeah,
might be
yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But these new generation of superhero tales, um, are impressive in their own right. They come with a lot of these same racial flaws as well, or some of them are attacking them very head on. Like Watchmen attacks race head on. Um, Watchmen attacks both race and homophobia head on.
Mm,
If you haven't seen it yet, it starts off with the bombing in Oklahoma in the 30s when they wiped out that town of
oh wow,
black
yeah.
people on Black Wall Street, right? Um, the it keeps jumping back from the present to the past, where they're telling the story about the first superhero, right? And like it keeps running like this documentary in between, right? That is supposed to be this fill of what society knows about the first superhero versus what is truth and what you find out in the past and the present, right? Um, and ultimately, you just come to find out that the first superhero was both black and gay, and they had to
Mm,
hide their identity because they were being persecuted. They couldn't help nobody because they was black. Like they was, they had to hide. That's reason for superheroes wearing masks, because this superhero who was black had to hide
yeah.
his identity, right? And Watchmen really tackles those issues head on at the highest level, like responsibly, ethically, poignantly. If you haven't watched Watchmen yet, the series, watch that. Um,
Yeah, and I keep forgetting about it. That's because people are saying it is probably like the best TV show that they've made just for this period. I've
yeah.
heard just so many high things about it. I really do need to sit down and probably once I'm done with Invincible, I think that's gonna be my next one.
Watchmen blew my mind last year when I watched it. It is I really just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg with what's going on with Watchmen. Let's put it that way.
Mm.
Watchmen really deals with some heavy hitting stuff. Really relevant social issues, from the past, from the present, all the things in between. Um, that's a really good one. Yeah, yeah. You know what? Start doing your homework. We're getting close, probably to the end of this show. I
Yeah.
think. I think we kind of covered really what we wanted to talk about. So you know what? I'm gonna urge you guys to I'm gonna do some homework. Okay. So I got
You
some
know what else
shows.
I'm gonna urge you guys to do? Anybody who is listening is the next time one of these books comes out, even if it's not a person of color that represents you specifically, do support it, right?
Right.
Because really, these larger companies and even indie comics, like Black Sands, is this next one that I'm looking into, and I'm
Oh
gonna
yeah, you
end up
follow
buying.
Black Sands too?
I do.
I do too. See, you gotta support, right?
So, and that's kind of my point, right? These people, the voices are amplified with dollar signs, unfortunately, right? Marvel's not going to keep making, black comic books if they're not getting the same dollar amount, right? They don't really care about the message, when it really comes down to it, if it's not making them money. And that goes along with your independent comic developers too, because these people can't get their voices out there if their projects aren't becoming successful. The world is bigger than Marvel and DC Comics. When you get a chance, check out Black Sands. Check out some of these, smaller known Black created comics out there, Asian created comics, because it's not like they don't exist. It's not like they're not trying to make their voices being heard. Take the time out of your day to shoot $4 your comic book creators way, right? That's how we're going to see this representation fixed. When we start giving these people the spotlight, when we start giving them the attention they deserve, that sends echoes and just shockwaves throughout the industry in a way that I don't think is appreciated enough. Go support your indie people of color, right?
Here, here.
Definitely.
No, he's right. Get out there, pick up those titles. Do the same thing with all works of media, right?
Hmm.
Like how many of you will watch Lupin on Netflix, right? We stars a black French actor and a predominantly, mixed cast of people. Like,
Hmm.
go watch that. It's good. Um,
Yeah, because they're not going to make more if you ain't watching it,
watching
man.
it,
Make
right?
more,
Go
support it.
watch go watch Onyx Equinox on Netflix on
Yeah.
Crunchyroll. Like, go support that. That is a great look into Mesoamerica. Like, go support that. I mean, they get into Aztec gods and cultures and the reasons for sacrifice, and the art is beautiful and the story is amazing, and it was written by a, I can only imagine what is a genius woman. Like, just go support things. Well, support everything. Support all creators. I'm not telling you to stop supporting, you know, works that have predominantly white characters in it, right? That would be foolish, right?
Oh
But
yeah, definitely not, right? Because I mean, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that some of my favorite comic book stories have not been white created.
right,
We're not even about to go there,
right, right,
right?
right, right. But do
I'll
make
still be reading
sure
those.
that as easily as you accept a white character, white main character in your literature, in your comic books, in your movies, in your animation, be as readily to accept a woman, a person of color, someone who has a different sexuality than your own, right? Don't let those things deter you from enjoying. Hey, what's up, Shattered? Don't let those things deter you from enjoying content, right? Like, and demand that you have more representation no matter who you are, right? If you're a woman, demand more representation. If you're homosexual, demand more representation. If you're Asian, demand more representation, right? You
That's right.
want to be able to celebrate yourself in what you read and what you see, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. You shouldn't be ashamed of wanting to see more of you, but you also shouldn't accept anything less than what they're giving for themselves.
And really support it, because I promise you, some of the best stories ever are coming from all perspectives. You never want to knock out a single, perspective from a certain type of people. You get the best stories that way, right? You get the best content and media when you support everybody's perspective. That's just math. It's been proven over and over again. Diversity makes huge, huge differences. So, um, go buy an Asian comic book. You don't got to be Asian. Just be willing to have the conversation. Go
And,
ingest it,
and that's
talk
easy to
about it.
do because there's like a million different manga titles for you to choose from. So,
Oh, there's a ridiculous amount. Yeah.
we are okay. We are going to talk about manga one day on this show, because it
Yeah,
is
for
also
sure.
it is also comics. They are also represented in graphic novel format and animation
Hmm.
format and live action format. So manga is not off the table. Anime is not off the table on this show. We're just going to reserve it for its own discussion. I believe it should have its own discussion. I'm super passionate about it.
Oh yeah, it
Um,
deserves its own respect. It's a big part of pop culture
it,
today.
it
Like
it
that.
is a
That's for
huge
sure
part of
going to
pop
be
culture today.
probably a couple of episodes if we're being honest.
But and honestly, I could drag this conversation over to next week too. But
Hmm.
because Ace missed out on this conversation, we might just come back to it like at another time, right? We
Yeah.
might revisit it when it becomes more relevant again, or something, something adjacent to it comes back up. We'll come back to this topic. But I think what we're going to do next week, and I think me and Kelvin are probably on the same page, is we're gonna talk about some independent titles that have recently been brought to media. Okay, and what they mean for the future of what superhero stories look like. I'm gonna tell you guys to watch some things or get familiar with some things, so I'm not ruining anything when I have these discussions with you next week.
Hmm.
But definitely, we're going to talk about Invincible. We're going to talk about Jupiter's Legacy. We're going to talk about Watchmen. We're going to talk about the Umbrella Academy for sure, for sure. Um, these four titles have drastically changed the landscape of the boys. Yeah, put the boys on that list as well. Those
Oh
four
yeah,
those
boy, it's got to be there.
yeah, those five titles have drastically changed the landscape of what a superhero and a superhero society means and what it looks like. Um,
And where
there's
it's going, because these
right,
have like it really is. You're starting to see the way that these are doing. They're starting to kind of send ripples throughout other forms of media now. People want to see more of this, right?
yes, yes. Largely even Deadpool is kind of the at a core of that discussion of what an anti-hero looks like, what a non-traditional take on a superhero and their level of responsibility society is. I think
Yeah.
Jupiter's Legacy handles this particular topic at the highest levels. It is really a long, very, very long conversation about, you know, the responsibility of heroes, what lines they can and cannot cross, and if they did cross these lines, will it be better or worse?
Mm,
Um, so um, there is action in Jupiter's Legacy. It can be slightly hokey, but that is not the point of the show.
right.
The point of the show is literally the conversation for next week, right? And it is that at the highest level of, what does it look like for a superpowered being to govern, to take a life, to intercede with the everyday things that mankind deals with, right? If that's even a line that should be crossed ultimately.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, watch Jupiter's Legacy for sure. That's going to have a huge impact on the conversation. And it's only 8 episodes, pretty short watch. Um, actually, I
Pretty
think
much almost all of these are like none of these are like really long commitments, right? Like the
uh,
boys, I think
z-
was what 10 episodes a season.
yeah, and it's 2 seasons. The Boys is 2 seasons in, and The Boys is about to start the third season, so it's a good time to catch up on The Boys. That
Definitely.
is another very interesting look on what superhero society looks like. Um,
Hmm.
from the ads, and them
The
having
corporate
sponsorships and the
deals.
corporate deals and whatnot. Really, 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 really introspective on what that looks like. And Jupiter's Legacy deals with that at some levels too, but that's really surface in Jupiter's Legacy. Jupiter's Legacy is really dealing with the bigger question of, what happens when goblins live among us and what
Mm.
responsibility they have, on our lives, right? Um, and then, like I said, Watchmen just straight up is dealing with race and sexuality and how you can be the most powerful fear being on the planet and still deal with racism at the highest levels and homophobia at the highest levels. Same thing with Avin Bashir in Blue Marvel conversation. Like
Yeah.
they literally racism him out of being a hero.
Yeah, they sure did. Oh, and speaking of him, I meant to say something earlier. The Marvels show
Yeah,
or the movie Captain Marvel 2, the Marvels, if they better not miss this golden opportunity to introduce him into the MCU.
yeah.
If that movie is called The Marvels
And the
and we
Blue
get Miss
Marvel is
Marvel,
not in it.
Spectrum, Captain Marvel, if they don't at least somehow reference it, introduce him, bring him in, I'm gonna be massively disappointed.
So disappointed, dude. So disappointed.
Because you saw that they put the logo for Miss Marvel and Spectrum on there. If they don't have Blue Marvel in there in some way, I'm gonna be losing my shit in the movie
I
theater.
mean, because that's half the Ultimates anyway.
It is, and they've almost put together, almost the whole team in the MCU.
They almost have put together the whole Ultimates team. So okay,
Yep.
so that's a minority book that you could read that you probably didn't realize was a minority book. The Ultimates.
Probably one of the best ones too. It tells the bigger picture story too.
Yep.
They were not afraid to tell Marvel's biggest picture story without white characters, and it was
Yep. Well,
so
there was one white character,
fun.
Captain Marvel, but she's a
Yeah.
female, right? So she's still a minority, right? So
Yep.
yeah, Captain Marvel, American Chavez, Adam Bashir, Spectrum, and I'm missing somebody else who's on the Ultimates.
Um, are you missing anybody? I think you
Maybe
might have
I'm
got them.
not. I might have got them all. Black Panther.
Yeah.
Black
Yeah.
Panther was on the Ultimates. Ah!
Did you not say that? Yeah, I
No, I
thought
didn't
you
say.
said.
No, I didn't say Black Panther. Yeah. All
Okay.
right. So that's actually So that's all minority book, right? That is hot, super respected. Like Marvel put a lot of money into the Ultimates, both the first and the second one. Good art, great story. The whole team is minorities, and they literally are solving the ultimate problems of the multiverse. So,
And straight out is probably one of the most powerful teams Marvel has put together.
I
Period. Like just as far as
love the Ultimates. I love the Ultimates. I love
such a
that's
good book.
in the last year of all the comics I read, Ultimates 1 and 2 for me was like the best. Like I thought
Yeah, the
that.
only thing that brought the Ultimates down for me was the inclusion of Civil War stuff spilling over into the Ultimates.
Yeah, but it was Civil War time. I mean, what was they gonna do?
Yeah, they had to do it. I think that's the only time when it faltered, and even that was like just a brief moment of that whole thing. But man, like talk about making me love hating Carol Danvers. Like I do not like Carol Danvers. I never have, but like they do such a good job of writing
Oh,
why I don't like her.
you can hate her after the Ultimates, yes, for
Yeah. Oh,
sure,
for sure.
for sure. You can dislike her before it. You can hate her after it. You can despise her
Oh
after
yeah,
it.
she's a piece of
Her and
crap. I hate.
her precog law. Get out of here with that.
Uh, Captain Marvel fans don't have this debate with me. I'm gonna tear you up. She's a horrible person.
She is a horrible person. You know, she caught a lot of backlash too. She got caught up in that Gamergate mess as well.
Oh yeah,
Not just
she might have been what started it because
yeah, not just the character Captain Marvel, but the actress Brie Larson.
oh
And
yeah,
I don't blame Brie Larson for being like, I want to bring a positive and strong female character to the screen. Her
yeah, and she
getting
got
backlash for that was
backlash.
ridiculous.
Well, and not just that, the people who were giving it took almost everything she said out of context.
Everything
Just
she said.
their agenda across. It was pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, no. I think Brie Larson, first of all, I thought Captain Marvel was a great movie. Personally.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah,
I thought
I didn't
I
hate it.
thought I thought that it was a great movie. I thought the soundtrack was amazing. I thought the cinematography was amazing. I thought the one-liners were great. The callbacks to the rest of the MCU was fantastic. Like, I don't know how anybody had a problem with Miss Marvel, right? One. Besides for they were being, bigots
Yeah,
as far as I'm concerned. You know what I'm saying? Like, I thought that movie was fantastic. I thought they did a great job introducing who would be Spectrum later in WandaVision. Like, I think they nailed. I think okay. Like I'm gonna go back to the soundtrack. The '90s girl power soundtrack in that movie was so friggin'
perfect, right?
awesome. Yo,
Honestly,
like that movie was nailed so well for it to
Oh yeah,
have
Crash
so
would be
many
a
critics,
blockbuster.
like
You know what? Every negative critic, because like I'll sit there and I really do try to digest an educated conversation about why you may not have enjoyed it or why you think it was bad, even right. But every negative critic that came out about it, all they had to say was that they didn't want to see a woman in power. So I'm like,
that's
okay, well, I got
they
time
might
for
have
that.
not said that in so many words, but that's what all their words amount to.
Yeah,
Right, is I didn't want to see I didn't want to see a strong female. I didn't want to see a strong female character. I definitely didn't want the actress to say that I was going to see a strong female character.
yep,
Right, and that's what the whole conversation with Captain Marvel and Brie Larson comes down to. I feel that she did a tremendous job in the role. I felt that Marvel Studios and Disney did a tremendous job with the film. I enjoyed it. I've watched it like probably 6 times since I bought it. Like I think Captain Marvel was a great movie, right? I
it's
think
good.
I think Doctor Strange, the first one, or the Doctor Strange movie was less of a movie than Captain Marvel, to be honest with you, right? Like, okay, I think Doctor Strange, as far as number ones go for Marvel, like the first movie, I think that
Mm,
was the only miss and the worst miss, right? Like they've had some bad number twos and some bad number threes, but those are movies, right? Like movies generally follow those patterns.
yeah.
But like I feel like Doctor Strange was kind of a letdown ultimately, as far as a first movie went, right? Like I feel like the critics should have berated that the way they berated Brie Larson's performance and portrayal of Captain Marvel.
See, I don't know. I enjoyed Doctor Strange a lot, but I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like it was a good written movie. It was not written well,
Yeah,
and
I enjoyed it, right?
yeah,
For a if it was a good enough movie for a Marvel movie, I felt like it was lackluster,
yeah.
right? That's always
It
been my argument with Doctor Strange is for a Marvel movie, I felt like it didn't stack up to the other Marvel movies for, first one. So the
it
special
it
effects
fits
were
in like
lax.
yeah, it fits in like Mortal Kombat. It's fun to watch, right? Ton of fun to
Yeah.
watch.
Yeah.
Not a good movie.
I thought the special effects were stupid. Like I didn't understand how those, you know, what are those things that you put on your eye and you turn them, the kaleidoscopes?
Oh, the
Yeah.
kaleidoscope.
I
Yeah.
didn't think the kaleidoscope magic made sense. Right. Dormammu was a horrible end villain.
Oh,
I think Doctor Strange was a complete miss for a first
should have been
Marvel
more though.
movie. Right, it should have been
Yeah,
Mordo. Right, the villain should have been
another black
Mordo. Like,
character
how
that
did
you
they
could have
miss?
made.
How
No,
did they miss that? How did they miss making the villain Mordo?
I have no idea. And another character, like not black in the comics, made black for this, still chose to not give him a spotlight.
Right. And I can feel them making Mordo whatever color they wanted to in this. Like, almost
Yeah, because it
nobody
worked.
knows who that character is, and it doesn't matter if he's white or.
Nope.
And really, he kind of looks Asian in the comics, to be honest with you. Like,
Yeah,
there's some confusion on what Mordo is to begin with, anyway.
yeah,
But so I can give them that creative liberty. You want to cast a black actor in that spot? No one knows who Mordo is.
yeah. Nobody cared. Nobody
No
complained.
one.
Nobody had any problems.
Right. But you made him black, and then you missed the opportunity. Okay, so from a few standpoints, right? From a writer's perspective, it would have been much easier to sell the fight between Mordo and Doctor Strange
Yeah, because they
on
built his
film.
character. That's what I hate about it is that, and that's why I say it was badly written because they built Mordo up with good writing for Mordo specifically, and then just made him disappear.
Right. And that would have been a
Yeah,
much easier fight to sell on screen than trying to resolve the Dormammu issue, which they had to resolve with, you know,
Groundhog Day.
well, yeah, with Groundhog's Day, exactly. You know what I'm saying? And essentially Dormammu having a fit like he's a 2-year-old, which
Yeah,
makes, you know, zero sense in the grand scheme of things, right?
it really does. You're talking about a
He's a
god who is
planar
out of
entity,
time,
right? Like,
getting
yo,
frustrated with time. Come
right.
on.
No, like he rules a whole plane of existence. He's not going to get wrapped up in a time trick. He's just going to, change the rules of the existence he lives in. Cause he rules it. Like
Well, and nor would he be frustrated by it. This dude's been alive for what, millions,
these are
maybe billions
millions
of
of
years.
years. Right. Like, what's hanging out with Doctor Strange for 10 minutes?
and we're gonna assume that Stephen Strange has the mindset to not drive himself insane by
Saying
doing this
doing
over
that,
and over.
right.
But
There's also
Dormammu
that,
does, right?
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, Dormammu went crazy, not Stephen Strange.
that's why I enjoyed it, but it was just horribly written.
Right.
Horribly
I,
written.
I enjoyed it, but it was a good movie for a Marvel movie. It was for me the bottom of the barrel, right? And I put it below like Iron Man 3 and Thor Dark World because it was the first Doctor Strange movie, right?
Mm,
At least Iron Man 3 was the third installment of Iron Man. At least Dark
yeah.
World was the second installment of Thor, right? That gives you some birth to mess up a movie when you're on 2 and 3.
Well, and even those, I'm kind of excited to go back and rewatch Iron Man 3 and even Thor Dark World, because there are some arguments saying that, those may not have been as bad as I think we all thought. Even though I've seen them multiple times, and like, they're definitely
They are good
the
movies.
worst
Same thing. They're
MCU movie.
just not good Marvel movies, right?
Yeah.
They just don't really stack up to what we expect from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's not that they were
Yeah.
bad movies. I didn't hate Thor: Dark World, not as much as everybody else does. I
No,
do,
I enjoyed it.
I
I
do get
don't.
the obvious complaints about the movie, but I enjoyed the movie. Iron
Yeah.
Man 3, okay, it had its moments, right? Like it had its moments that were incredibly enjoyable. It had its moments that were like really hokey, and then it had its moments that were just downright ridiculous, right? It seemed like they try to again. Those two movies really come down to their villains, or those three movies really come down to their villains, right? As the problem.
And that's what
Um,
makes these special, right? It's what made Iron Man 2 special. Vanko was an amazing villain for that movie, right?
yeah,
Um, all of them, every single one. Obadiah Stane he was a dope villain. That wasn't the best Marvel movie, but Obadiah Stane was a dope villain, right?
No,
He
I
was,
agree, right? There was magic in Iron Man 1, right? Like you
mhm.
can't there's no one that can sit there and be like, Iron Man 1 wasn't dope because Iron Man 1 was dope. Like it was dope. You know what I'm saying? Obadiah, he played a great Obadiah Stane, and Obadiah Stane was believable as Iron Man's first character. The same way Mordo would have been believable as Doctor Strange's first villain.
Yeah. And you know what? Just to get into wrapping this up, Iron Man 1 might be good for next week's conversation too, because that very much was what would happen if this really happened, right? We weren't
Yeah,
introduced into the magical world of the MCU. We got a regular guy kind of building something like a real CEO dealing with the consequences of, real Iraq time war, right?
right.
Um, that one might be good to just kind of throw in there too.
But word, you know what? We will talk about some. Well, we will throw in what DC and Marvel have for real life consequences for superheroism. Let's
Briefly, because they don't touch on it often, right?
you know what? That's okay. So I guess that's a perspective thing because they do have complete comic books dedicated to that, like Damage Control,
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a fair
right?
point.
Where the superheroes go around destroying the city, but there's a whole insurance agency and collective that dedicates their own money and time to fixing all the things that the superheroes destroy. Like, so it's not a completely abandoned concept in those universes as well, right?
Right.
Like they do realize there's a consequence for it. They just explore it a different way,
Yeah.
right? Like there's no social consequencing to superherodom in Marvel and DC, right? The people just readily accept that they're superheroes, right?
Right.
They don't really have any financial gain, or they don't really, the heroes don't ever step out of being heroes and exploiting their powers. They're just they're relegated to being good heroes, right? Um Whereas with these other things we're talking about right now, really it is more of a situation where we're looking at like the fiscal ramifications of superherodom, like things like sponsorship, right? the social
Yeah.
ramifications of superherodom, the racial ramifications of superherodom, right? Um, those are the things we get to look at when we look at these other type of comics, because that's actually what they're about, right? They're not
Yeah,
really
that's the
about
whole point. Like, Marvel, DC, they may gloss across this every now and then with, one or two books, but with these shows that we're talking about and these comics that have been, this is their whole point. They're trying to get that point across to you. They're not
right.
trying to tell a superhero origin story, right? They're trying to
And as a
get a
matter of
social point.
factly, they use heroes that are familiar to you so that you're not distracted by the power set and you can focus on the content of the story, right? So that's why
Yeah.
you see so many Superman tropes in like The
Homelander,
Boys, or
Omni-Man.
exactly, Utopian, and this new thing in Jupiter's Legacy. You see
Mm,
these Superman tropes because it's easy for you to rem- it's okay. They answer a lot of the questions you have with Superman, right? Like, how do you write a Superman story without bringing in these aspects to the Superman story, right? Like, so like you're familiar with the character, but you're not familiar with the level of insanity or the level of commitment they might have to something other than Earth or the United States, or
yeah.
a overcommitment they have to these things, right? Because largely that's what Jupiter's Legacy deals with, is an overcommitment to these ideals, right?
Yeah.
Um, then you have like The Boys, where we deal with a undercommitment to these ideals, mostly because the person wielding the power is a friggin' sociopath, right? And then you have, the situations like, in Invincible, where we're looking at, an alien invasion, right? Where they have no loyalty to humanity and the people that live here. What does that look like, right?
Mm.
So, that's what we're going to talk about next week. So, get your shows watched. If you haven't watched them, start at least watching a couple episodes so you're familiar with who we're talking about. I do suggest you finish them. I know it's possible. I just finished Shadow and Bone and Jupiter's Legacy in like 2 days. So you could do it. I know you can. I have faith in you.
For sure.
Yeah, yeah, you
Pace
could do it.
yourself.
Right. Pace yourself, but you could do it. But no, that's what we're talking about next week. We're going to talk about all these indie titles, how they're being developed for television, the impact that they're having on the comic landscape, and what that's going to mean, honestly, for the future of what all comics have to present to us, what we're going to accept as a good hero story,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm sure that after these, after a year or two of exposure to stories like this, um, we're going to start demanding a different type of hero story, right?
Yeah, it's really going to be an interesting conversation going forward. I'm pumped for next week, but you're absolutely right. I think that what these have done unknowingly with way more people than a regular comic book would have reached is you've kind of created a higher standard of what kind of story that the general public wants out of this kind of stuff, right? We're going to be talking about The Boys and Jupiter's Legacy and Invincible for a long
And
time,
a level of
and
violence.
yeah, definitely you're yeah, for sure, because they are not being shy about it, right?
All of these shows, except for maybe the Umbrella Academy, come with a new level of violence that we really haven't seen as acceptable in what we take for superhero fantasy. So, yeah, we're going to talk about that next week. We're going to talk about the impact that they're just having on the landscape. They are just really just changing the narrative completely on what it means to both be a comic book property and what it looks like to be a superhero. So we'll talk about that. It's been a great conversation for everyone that did join. Thanks so much for joining. For everyone who's going to listen to the future, thanks so much for checking us out. Listen to our conversation.
Thank you,
I'm Mr. Solutions.
Kelvin. It's good to see you guys.
It's been a great conversation. You guys stay safe, you stay positive, and you stay creative. This has been Comic Cinema Clash. We'll catch you next Saturday at the same time.
See you next week.
And I'm gonna end this when I find my mouse.